Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. For over 4.5 centuries, she's been portrayed in books and movies as a shy, reluctant girl forced into marriage and the throne.
Or a scheming traitor who knew exactly what she was doing. Who was Lady Jane Grey? Was she innocent or a traitor? Well, it's complicated.
Let's dig into this.
Henry VIII, King of England, died on January 28, 1547, leaving 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Mary and Elizabeth had already been removed from the succession by their father, so on his death, the throne passed directly to Henry's only son. He was crowned Edward VI on February 20th, 1547, at the age of 9.
Lady Jane Grey, born in 1537, was the daughter of Francis Brandon and Henry Grey. Her mother, Frances, was the daughter of King Henry VIII's sister Mary, who had quickly married Henry VIII's friend Charles Brandon without permission after her first husband, the King of France, had died. This caused a huge family and court kerfuffle, but it was a love match, and it resulted in her granddaughter, Jane Grey, being the cousin of King Edward VI.
Edward was also born in 1537. His mother was Jane Seymour, the third wife of Henry VIII. Edward was the first Protestant king of England. Due to his age, the actual business of England was done by a council of regency until Edward was old enough to rule.
Edward had 2 power-hungry maternal uncles. Jane Seymour's older brother Edward Seymour took control of both the council and the young king shortly after Henry VIII's death. Named Lord Protector and Duke of Somerset, he became the most powerful man in England. His grip on power, and the king, was tight, and both he and his wife became extremely arrogant, acting as if they were the real king and queen.
Jane Seymour's younger brother was Thomas Seymour, who married Henry VIII's widow and Edward VI's stepmother, Catherine Parr, so soon after the Henry VIII's death that it broke court protocol. The young king was reportedly delighted by the match. Thomas was one of his favorite people, and no wonder. Thomas would give the king money and gifts, and feed his ego. Thomas Seymour was intensely jealous of his brother and Lord Protector and tried to gain control over the young King Edward and remove his brother from power.
Lady Jane Grey had a childhood filled with changes and upheaval. Many historians believe her mother was quite cruel. Jane said she would be slapped and pinched for the tiniest infraction of rules at the home. Of course, at this time in history, children were expected to be tiny adults and were raised with very strict rules. Jane, as the close relative of royalty, would have been raised and educated to be a glittering jewel in the aristocracy.
At the age of 9 or 10, Jane's life changed when she was sent to the home of Thomas Seymour, now Lord Sudeley, and his new wife, Henry VIII's widow, Catherine Parr. It was quite common for children to spend several years in another family of equal or high status. Jane was lucky to be placed in a household where education, especially for girls, was considered very important, and she embraced the Protestant faith.
In the fall of 1548, Catherine died in childbirth, and Jane was sent home for a time. She would return to the Seymour household a short time later and become part of Thomas Seymour's plan to gain power over his brother, the Lord Protector, and young King Edward VI. Thomas Seymour planned to marry King Edward to Lady Jane Grey.
Unfortunately for Jane, Thomas Seymour, who had always been jealous, impatient man prone to making bad decisions, made the fatal mistake of trying to break into a young King Edward's private apartments. He shot one of the king's pet spaniels when the dog barked, alerting guards to his presence. He was arrested, charged with treason, and executed in 1549, and Lady Jane Grey was sent home again.
Meanwhile, Edward Seymour, Lord Protector, was making mistakes of his own. Arrogant, egotistical, and protective of his position, he had made many enemies in the Council of Regency. The country was nearly bankrupt due to his policies, and the members of the council, led by the unscrupulous John Dudley, moved against him.
In 1549, Seymour was warned the council would remove him from power. He took young King Edward to Windsor Castle and held him there, saying it was only for the king's protection. The council had him arrested. Later, he was released and even given a lower position in the council, but it wasn't enough for Edward Seymour, and he hadn't learned from his mistakes. In 1551, he was charged with treason and beheaded after his plan to overthrow the council and take control again was discovered. John Dudley took his place, and Dudley was no better.
In 1553, it became clear the 15-year-old king would not survive a terrible illness, possibly tuberculosis, and Dudley started making plans for the future. He married his son Guildford to the Lady Jane Grey. Jane did not have a choice in this. Then he convinced the king his cousin Jane would be the best choice as queen after his death.
Naming Jane his successor would have solved the sticky problem of Edward's sisters. Catholic Mary would certainly undo Edward's Protestant agenda, which was incredibly important to him. Jane would continue what he had started. It would also prevent any political battle between his sisters over the throne. It looked like it would be the perfect solution, so Edward VI wrote in his wishes in a document called Device for Succession. The document was agreed to by the Privy Council.
It is not known if Lady Jane Grey was happy marrying Guildford Dudley, and it didn't matter. Love and happiness had nothing to do with marriage in those days. Jane would later say she loved her husband, but she made it clear she did not like his family.
Edward VI died on July 6, 1553. On July 9th, John Dudley and the Privy Council informed Lady Jane Grey of his succession plan. It was reported that she fainted when she heard that she was now queen. She also argued that she had no right to the crown. But after being told it was the king's wish and supported by the council, she agreed. On July 10th, 1553, her father-in-law, John Dudley, proclaimed Lady Jane Grey Queen of England.
Lady Jane did not know it, but she was already facing a fate beyond her control. The people of London felt King Henry VIII's daughter Mary was the next rightful heir to the throne. Almost immediately, the support of the council began to disappear. Jane, acting as Queen of England, was taken to the Tower of London to prepare for her coronation. It would never be held.
She would spend her entire reign in the Tower. As soon as she arrived, her husband, his family, and her own family all put her under extreme pressure to proclaim her husband, Guildford Dudley, King of England. Despite being mentally, emotionally, and physically attacked, she flatly refused. Guildford and his mother were furious, and Guildford acted as though he was king.
She also received notice from Mary Tudor that she had no right to the throne, and Mary intended to take her rightful place as queen.
Mary Tudor had started for London as soon as she was certain her brother had died. She had gained supporters along the way. On July 14th, Jane's father-in-law, Dudley, took troops from London to try to capture her and place her in the Tower. 5 days later, behind Dudley's back, the Privy Council proclaimed Mary Queen. On that day, Jane and her husband Guildford were imprisoned, separately, in the Tower.
Jane's family abandoned her, trying to save their own lives. Her father-in-law, John Dudley, the mastermind of Jane's rise to the throne, also abandoned her immediately, saying Mary, and not Jane, was rightful ruler of England. It didn't save him. He was executed on August 22nd, 1553. Parliament declared Mary queen in September and named Jane Grey a usurper of the throne.
Jane, now called Jane Dudley, her husband Guildford, and others were put on trial for high treason. Jane was allowed to send a letter to Queen Mary explaining the events that her part was in. The evidence presented against Jane at the trial included documents that she had signed as Jane the Queen, which sealed her fate.
She was sentenced to be executed for treason, although no plans for the execution were made. Queen Mary seems to have felt that Jane was at least not totally at fault, and reportedly said that her conscience would not allow her to execute her cousin. Jane and Guildford were held prisoner in the Tower.
Unfortunately for Jane, Queen Mary's persecution of Protestants and plans to marry Philip II of Spain caused outrage by the people and the government. Early in 1554, uprisings broke out, and one, called the Wyatt's Rebellion, became a serious threat to Queen Mary's rule. Jane and Guildford seem to have had nothing to do with the rebellion, but Lady Jane's father and brother were involved, incriminating the couple by association. The Privy Council convinced Queen Mary that both Jane and Guildford posed a serious and ongoing threats to her reign. She ordered their executions.
Guildford asked to see Jane, but she refused. On February 12, 1554, both Guildford and Jane were executed. On the scaffold, Jane stated her innocence in ever wanting to take the throne, but also admitted she was guilty of eventually consenting. She then read Psalm 51 from her prayer book. Her ladies helped her remove her gloves and placed a blindfold over her eyes. She panicked when she could not find the block with her hands and had to be helped. The executioner removed her head with one stroke. Jane Grey Dudley was 16 or 17 years old.
Was Lady Jane Grey innocent of treason? If King Edward VI named her as his successor, and the Privy Council confirmed her as queen, was there anything to be innocent of?
Jane wasn't a scheming traitor who plotted to gain the throne. Her family, including her new husband and in-laws, certainly were. But Jane doesn't seem to have had any choice or any options in the whole matter.
Her own words on the scaffold, saying she was guilty of giving her consent, but innocent of the ambition for the throne, is an amazing statement of a girl who was caught in a political trap set by her own family, from Edward VI and her parents, to her husband and father-in-law. In the end, the truth may be that Jane Grey was both guilty and innocent.
Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.